My husband is not someone who takes initiative when it comes to our relationship. I mean, he's known to make timely grand gestures, but he's not someone who books a weekend getaway unprompted, wedding anniversary or not. So I was really surprised when Dan told me that we would be staying at the Claremont Club and Spa Hotel. Even more surprising was the fact that he knew I wanted to stay there at all. I had thrown it out there one day as a filler comment, one of those choppy conversations where we just made sounds at each other and never expected to retain anything said by the other. But he did. We had tried and failed at the whole anniversary thing before. 5 times, actually. Our first anniversary was during the early days of COVID. The next year we had our son. The following year, our son came down with croup. The week before our 3rd anniversary, I gave birth again. This time to twins. And last year, we were simply too exhausted to even imagine doing anything for ourselves. So needless to say, it's been a challenging task to celebrate our marriage. But this year, it seemed like we were actually going to be able to do it. I made sure contingency plans were in place. I may have even went overboard because I had 2 backup sitters in line should my parents get overwhelmed by our 3 under 3. Dan reached over to offer a comforting hand during our drive into the Berkeley Hills. He could see that I was holding my phone in a way that I was anticipating the dreaded call, asking us to turn around because something went wrong. This is what going 0 for 5 does to someone. I had been stripped of positive expectations. I even started thinking us not being able to celebrate our anniversary was a bad omen for our marriage. It wasn't Dan's initial joke that almost ruined my mood, but the follow-up. As we were pulling up to the hotel, he made a joke about the building looking like the architectural version of a Karen. I didn't get it at first, but he pointed out the hotel's exterior was painted in the widest pair of whites. It sat atop a hill in a wealthy neighborhood looking down on Oakland, and has a very unwelcoming barbed wired fence running along the property line. I told him it's been a half-decade-long struggle to even be able to have this getaway with him, and that I didn't want stupid jokes. I wanted relaxing and romantic. He told me I sounded like a Karen. He was right, and that was more annoying than the fact I was sounding like a Karen. We entered the lobby, and it still didn't feel like reality to me. I was fully expecting us to leave at any moment, but with each step we took towards our room, I grew more and more comfortable. Which, I might add, was a lot of steps, because he booked us the Tower Suite, a suite that sat lonely at the very end of a repetitive and luminal hallway. By the time we got into the room, climbed up our private set of stairs, and took in the panoramic views framed within the columns of the outdoor top-floor tower, I had completely let my guard down. We were really doing it. Finally, we were celebrating our anniversary. We packed light but carried a lot of baggage into the room with us. Recently, we had been at odds over what seemed like a million little things. But the bigger problem for me was that he felt so distant, and that was never good historically. When you get married, they warn you that marriage will have days that are not so easy. What they don't tell you is that not only are some days not so easy, but they are actively really damn hard. The pressures of life and parenting had been beating us up for a while now, and I mean, even before that. We were high school sweethearts who rollercoastered our way to a wedding in our 30s, so it wasn't always cake and confetti with us. At times, our current relationship felt like we were busy putting out fires at such a rapid pace that we had no bandwidth for each other, me being at home, juggling the feedings, diaper changes, naps, and emotional breakdowns of my 3 babies, while also keeping our house in order and figuring out dinner every night. Him sitting in bumper-to-bumper commutes, working a mind-numbingly boring job, then walking through the front door and jumping right into baths and bedtimes. By the time we are finally able to sit down at the end of the night, I turn off my mind and turn on trash TV, as Dan decompresses into his phone for what feels like literal minutes. Then it's time to get up and go to sleep so we can do it all over again tomorrow. I'll be honest, at this point in life my week was so ridiculously short. I had never been this overworked, this hormonal, this depersonalized, this alone, but this sexually abandoned. Since the birth of our first child 3 years ago, sex has felt like a biannual event. So I was optimistically looking forward to the possibility of making it a bi-nightly event this weekend. We started our stay with an open-ended poolside session, even though neither of us being big swim people. I enjoyed the sun, and he enjoyed the nearby TV that was playing college football, and his phone chimed in with score notifications. I was deep into my first book in years, and every now and then would come up for air. Every time I did, it seemed like the other guests had cycled out and been replaced by new ones, all except one woman. In the distance, behind Dan's shoulder was a woman, not overtly lingering and honestly minding her own business, but there she constantly was, out of focus and in the background every time I looked over to Dan. Her face was obscured by hair and sunglasses, and even if it wasn't, my eyesight isn't bad enough that I wouldn't be able to see her clearly anyway. What I could make out was her everlasting grin. She never dropped the corners of her mouth. It was annoying, to be honest. How could someone be that happy? I mean, she had every right to be where she was, doing what she was doing. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that she was notable for some ominous reason. She felt off. The sun was setting over the bay, and we were watching from our tower. The cotton candy sky reflecting off the ocean should have been more than enough to hold my attention, but I found myself looking away, looking to where we were just sitting moments ago, to where the familiar woman was. I actually wasn't able to see her due to the trees blocking my vantage point, and I don't even know if she was still there for sure, but I just felt her there somehow. Dan sweetly touched my lower back, inviting me back into the moment with him. Our dinner reservations were pretty late. Luckily, the restaurant was in the hotel, a really swanky joint, cozy mid-century modern decor hid under the lowly lit lights. Yelp said the food was great, but the atmosphere was better, and I couldn't agree more. It was so far away from our everyday life that it was perfect. I don't know about Dan, but for that hour or so, I felt like a previous version of myself. I wasn't carrying the weight of responsibilities, wasn't facing a mountain of future to-dos, wasn't plopping my sad canned spaghetti onto plates. This was nice, and I felt a little guilty about how much I liked it. It didn't take long for Dan and I to be reminded that deep down, under the pile of daily life, we still had a spark. We fell right back into each other with ease. I don't know if it was a result of being romantically pent up or not, but he was as flirtatious as he's ever been with me. It was like a new side to him that I never met, so new that it almost felt alarming. Regardless, I was excited for the first time in a very long time. We were waiting on our entree when I started people watching. I like to imagine who strangers are and what led them to where they were. Sometimes at the end of nights, I'll search the location tag on Instagram and see if I can find anyone I recognize to see how close my assumptions of them were. It's a nosy habit, I know, But in my defense, on a normal day, Dan isn't exactly engaging. He's prone to getting lost in his phone. It's actually annoying, to be honest, and quite enraging when one of his buddies' text earns an actual smirk out of him, and I just have to sit there out of the loop, smirkless. At this point, our food still wasn't at the table, and I've assigned every booth and table their own names, traits, and relationships. I came to the realization that I was out of strangers when I noticed a whole new crop of people. Behind Dan's side of the table was a mirror on the wall, positioned just right so that I could see the bar patrons. I panned down the bar stools, playing a game of tech douche. Then I get to the last person, and she is smiling directly back at me. I instinctually look down in fear of being caught and convince myself that she was probably looking at something else. I give it a few beats to work up courage and then look back up. She is still locked onto me. It is intense, to say the least. My embarrassment doesn't last long because I recognize her. It is the woman from the pool. It's frustratingly dim in the restaurant, and I can't make out her face exactly. But I know it's her. Her empty smile made me feel like her presence was intentional, and although smiles are usually a symbol of friendliness, hers looked like it was only for show. It's at this exact moment that Dan scoots out of his seat to use the restroom. After I watched him walk away into the darkness of the bathroom entrance, I looked back to the mirror to see nothing. She was gone. I can't tell you if I was relieved or scared at this. On the one hand, I didn't have to look at her, which was nice. On the other, she was lurking who knows where, doing who knows what, and that was pretty terrifying for some reason. Her energy did not feel right to me. On our way back to the room, I remembered that we only had one towel left in the room. I told Dan that I would grab some more from the front desk, and that he could go on without me since I wasn't ready to call it a night yet. I was feeling tense, and they had the fireplace going in the lobby, so my immediate plans included a glass of wine in one hand and my book in the other. He half-heartedly offered to stay with me, to which I assured him I was more than fine. I Goldilocks my way into the comfiest chair they had for an hour or so, reading and sipping and reading and sipping, and pretending to read while I eavesdropped on any conversation within earshot, before finally finishing my glass and getting up to go back up to the room. A ringless young lady dutifully listened as a golden-aged ringed man. When that didn't get the reaction he wanted, he pivoted to telling her how the hotel was haunted by a woman, how she lurks around still and no one knows why. I couldn't help but think about the woman I had been seeing all trip. He said she was harmless and was probably just someone who unfortunately passed away on the premises and couldn't move on for whatever reason. I know most people would be spooked by this. I'm not most people. Did I like possibly dealing with a ghost girl? No. But what this phantom lady wasn't going to do was take away the only free night I'd had in years. So I quickly evicted her out of my thoughts, told the bartender to fill up my glass, and stopped at the front desk for water bottles and towels before heading back to Dan. I was approaching a T in the hallway, where going right continues on to the other rooms, and left was where our suite was located. Ours was the only suite on that wing. One of the bottles rolled off of the towels I was holding and fell to the ground. I struggled down to grab it, trying not to drop anything else or spill my precious wine in the process. When I caught a motion in front of me, I looked up through my eyebrows and saw the ends of long hair and sheer fabric suspended in air, wrapping around the corner, trailed by a hand, sliding its fingertips on the wall, all headed towards my room. I heard our door close before I could catch up. I figured it was housekeeping. Maybe Dan forgot that I was going to get towels and called down for them. I walked in and Dan was freshly showered, still donning his towel. That was a bit uncomfortable for me, considering there was a guest in our room. I gave him a look and he asked, "What?" I snapped back. "Are you really walking around naked with a stranger in our room?" He was caught off guard. "What stranger?" I read his face for a moment. Dan has an incredibly dry sense of humor, and I don't always know when he's joking. I realized he wasn't. "The woman," I said. "The one who just came to the room. I saw her in the hallway and heard our door. Did you call housekeeping or something?" He started to get dressed and matter-of-factly said, "No, I didn't." I instantly started to feel uneasy at the thought that someone was intruding on us. We started looking around and couldn't find any trace of anyone other than us. I called down to the front desk and asked if housekeeping had come. After a long hold, they said they hadn't sent anyone up. I even had them check the cameras, to which they confirmed no one entered the room before me. News that I could try to rest my anxiety with. After a nice, warm, and relaxing shower with my wine glass, I got ready for bed. Dan was already in the covers, but moved over to make room for me when he saw me. I got in bed next to him, and he fit his body around mine. I forgot what this felt like. I didn't want to move because it was so perfect. I was getting ready to dust off the sensual side of my brain when I heard it. I waited for a second sound to be sure. Seconds later, my hunch was confirmed. He was snoring. I tried to sleep, I really did, and no matter how hard I rationalized, the feeling of someone being in my space prevented me from closing my eyes for long. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't see housekeeping. It was her. The woman. It had to be. Her existence was sticky. I couldn't get her out of my head, no matter how hard I tried. It's 3 a.m, and I'm in a full-on spiral with each snore. I'm starting to resent my husband more and more for leaving me alone. Why does he get to peacefully sleep in bliss while I'm so distressed? It didn't seem fair. It's never seemed fair. From the nightstand, Dan's phone screen lit up the room for just 1 second, and that's when I noticed it. It was blending into the shadows at first, but I could definitely make out a silhouette in the corner. Her silhouette. She was in my room and looking at me. I think maybe she could see that I was now aware of her because she washed away into the darkness as soon as the phone screen went black. This was it, the straw that broke me. I felt so discombobulated and uneven. I couldn't trust my own emotions. I had no idea that I could produce as many tears as were flooding my face. By now, Dan had woken up. I almost wish he hadn't. I tried to tell him that the woman was back. She was in our room. To my surprise, he responded a little combatively, probably because this was his first night of really good sleep in a long time, and I had prematurely ended it. He told me that there was no woman, that I had already looked, he looked, the front desk looked, and it was all in my head. He asked how many glasses of wine I'd had since dinner, as if wine was a hallucinogen. I started to feel like I didn't have the support of my partner. He was denying seeing the woman at all, even though I knew she was here. I hid my face into my hands in full breakdown. I think that's when Dan truly started to wake up. He didn't fully know what to do or how to react. He rubbed my back and apologized profusely, trying to get me to calm down. That didn't help. I felt alone. I felt scared. I felt crazy. He kept throwing out possibilities of why this was all happening. You're stressed, you're overworked, you're tired. All that did was make it worse. I wanted to scream for him to shut up, and I was going to. I really was. But when I looked up at him, there she was. Arms draped over his shoulders, head tilted, and eyes peeking through at me from behind his neck like a shy animal. I physically flinched at the sight. I couldn't tell at first when only her eyes were visible, but as she slowly veered from behind him, I could see she was wearing the most pervasive smile, as if she was taunting me. I started hyperventilating and instinctually fled the room. I bounced back and forth between hallway walls, trying to find my balance. Dan chased after me. My next memory is being in an emergency room bed. Dan says I wouldn't calm down and eventually passed out. The ambulance picked me up, and here we were waiting on blood work and tests. The doctor said I was having a pretty intense panic attack caused by stress. The daily grind probably caught up to me and I crumbled under it. They say panic attacks are more common than people realize. Mine being severe, I had to get follow-up treatment to prevent any more. After some weeks, I felt pretty back to normal. I had learned a few techniques to help when I was feeling anxious. Dan eventually joined some of these sessions as well, and as sad as it sounds, life moved on. You either have to catch up and move on with it, or you get left behind to struggle. I chose to repair and move on. Through the recovery, Dan picked up the slack to lighten my load. He was extremely remorseful of how alone I felt throughout the ordeal. He made it a point to get better about connecting and checking in with me. He was as great as he could be. I also found comfort in knowing our kids were so young that we were able to hide it all from them. They would grow up having no idea about Mommy's breakdown, or the woman that haunted me at the Claremont Hotel. My therapist still asks, and I think I've gotten good at lying, because when he does ask if I still see her, I say no pretty convincingly. The truth is, I do still see her all the time. She lives in my peripheral now, off to the side, out of focus, in the background, at the end of the grocery store aisle, across a crowd at my son's t-ball games, in the reflection of Dan's eyes when he leans in to kiss me. Sometimes I actually forget she's there. I know she is, but I don't give her the power anymore. Eventually she will just fade away. Or that's my hope, at least.